library system. So we're just taking a poll to see who's here and where everyone is from. So if you can just take a moment to fill into chat your library, and also if you have additional people viewing with you. We have about a minute before we get started, so we're getting close. All right, welcome to First Tuesday. Thank you for joining us today. I'm Jennifer Fenton from the Washington State Library. I'm your facilitator today. And a few housekeeping items before we jump right into our program. First Tuesday is brought to you by the Washington State Library. And Carolyn is on vacation today, so she's not able to join us, but she will return next month. We have our technicians with us. We have Nan and Jeremy. And so if you are having difficulty hearing or seeing what's happening, please send a shout out to them either through chat or through sending them an email or calling them. Their contact information is on the screen in front of you. And we're very lucky to have them. They're great. So welcome, and once again it's brought to you by the Washington State Library and funded through the Institute of Museum and Library Services. So for those of you just joining us, go ahead and type in chat where your library is, and also if you have additional people joining you to view this program, if you can let us know how many are watching. This helps us, we keep track of this for statistical purposes. And we have a great turnout. Wow, we're up to almost 20 people already. So thank you all for taking the time. In fact, we just gained a couple more people. So while we're signing in with your name and library affiliation, I wanted to give you a pitch for the September webinar for First Tuesdays, which will be called Twittering or Fabulous. And it will be presented by Nancy White of Full Circle Associates. And some of you may remember her from a project she worked on for Washington State Library on peer learning. So next month, when she talks about Twittering, the description is, with seemingly endless opportunities to try yet another social media tool, how do we assess the value of any of them? We'll use Twitter as a case study to experiment and develop practical assessment approaches. So if you always wanted to know why you should be Twittering, please join us in September on the first Tuesday of the month, which is the day after the holiday. And now it's my pleasure to start our program off with David Junius. He has been the Volunteer Services and Outreach Coordinator at Watauble since August 2008, working with the individuals, organizations, and companies that help provide their services. He has worked for such organizations as the American Red Cross, the University of California, and Northwest Harvest, and received his library master's from the University of Washington. Please welcome David.
Okay, thank you, Jennifer. Let's do a little show of hands in the little box with the green arrow. Can everyone hear me? Okay, we got 3 of 21. Okay, so people can hear me. Fantastic. Thank you. So hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us this morning for a First Tuesday webinar on volunteer programs. And the title of this is The Bottom Line on Volunteers. I am David Junius, the Volunteer Services and Outreach Coordinator with the Washington Talking Book and Braille Library, or Watauble as Jennifer was calling it. And for those of you who don't know, we are a library for the blind and physically handicapped that provides services for patrons who cannot access standard print due to vision loss or physical disability or other organic disability. And our services include a radio-based periodical reading service, book recording, Braille transcription, and a mail order service of materials created by us and the National Library Service, or NLS, which is in Washington, D.C., and we are a part of the NLS, and we are also part of the Washington State Library. And my contact information will be at the end of the presentation, so you can feel free to call me or email me with any questions that you may have once this is archived or even afterward. And there's also going to be a link for the library's website and our Facebook page so you can learn more about what we do. So first of all, the bottom line on volunteers, to start with some context on the national and state level. We can see from the top point here that 26.3% of the U.S. population volunteers, and this is for people who are 16 and older, so that includes youth, and they can be a big resource for your library to draw upon, especially in communities where school, community service, and internships may be involved. And then in the second point here, we've got some information from Washington, D.C.'s independent sector. And this is a group that studies nonprofits and quantifies the dollar value of volunteer time. And in Washington State, we are above the national average. So in 2010, the U.S. estimated value was $21.36. And in 2009, we were at $21.62. So we are above the average here in Washington, and I know in Alaska you are as well, and we're going to see a bigger picture of this in a later slide. So what is in it for your organization? Volunteers can be a great resource. And first of all, it provides a greater way to get some visibility for your library. It gets your name out there with another offering in addition to the great services and programs that your library already provides, and you create partnerships in your community. Forging these partnerships can be done with schools, service clubs like Rotary, Kiwanis, or Lions, other nonprofits and government agencies, and for example, and I'll be using these examples in the presentation, could be court-ordered community service, disabled work training, like here in Washington we have the State Department of Services for the Blind, and also senior employment groups such as the AARP, and corporations, which can also match their employees' donated time with financial support, which is an added benefit. And then third point here is it can increase diversity in your organization, and this includes expanding the age range, everyone from students to retirees, increasing the experience level of the folks who are involved with your library, and so this could be students and professionals and retired professionals, and also increasing the international makeup of your organization, so just having a broader range of diversity of the people there. And then also, the fourth point here is quantifying your support from the community, basically quantifying your support from the community to entities that can make budget decisions about your library, but not making it seem like you can get everything done with volunteer labor or by extension donated materials. So you're going to make it show first as your importance in the community and then as a budget saving thing during these difficult economic times. So really, making sure that you're getting your support shown, and then the added benefit is the fact that you're saving some money. Wish list work can get done, and this can be ongoing projects in a library like shelf reading, collection weeding, or other reorganizing, or special one-time projects like a maintenance job or some kind of beautification project. And lastly, it shows goodwill in that you are getting free work, but you're also helping the workers get school credit, for example, get job training, have their work skills assessed, earn a stipend, pay a parking fine, and so on. So, so we're going to talk a little bit more about that in a little bit. So first of all, HR and legal needs, most importantly, probably from the top down, is to get a policy in place that covers your liability. For example, the Washington State Library is part of the Washington Secretary of State, and the Secretary of State's office pays a quarterly labor and industries insurance on reported volunteer hours from Watauble. And so volunteers are covered under L&I Medical for any on-the-job injuries, which have not happened in the 3 years that I've been here, so let's knock wood on that. And then also it is required that state agencies pay the premiums for medical aid for all volunteers. So get a policy in place that is an agreement of what is expected of the volunteer and what the organization will be providing as a work site or as a volunteer partner. And then also, this keeps a backdoor exit or safety net for the library. So you don't need to reinvent the wheel per se, and you can probably modify existing employment policy and protocols. And for example, Watauble's online application has a checkbox that requires acceptance of some rules of engagement. So everyone is starting volunteering here with the same expectation, knowing just basically that they won't be showing up drunk and they won't be threatening other people, and you know, and so on and so on. So that is a good thing to have in place ahead of time. So policies and systems. Be sure that by bringing in volunteers, there is no appearance that they are usurping regular employees. I did some volunteer work at my neighborhood library branch a few years ago, and I was told that shelving, which was something that I'm thinking I'm going to do, it was only being done by employees who were in the union. And at the time I thought that was a very silly thing, but now I can understand why. Because, you know, for example, with us, the National Library Service has a rule that a library will not replace paid employees with volunteers and will not use volunteers in place of paid employees. And an example of this is about a year or so ago, we had a few layoffs here at Watauble. And our receptionist spot was one of those positions that was laid off. And so that spot was being covered by rotating staff, but never done by volunteers, even though some volunteers really wanted to do it. And we decided not to have volunteers covering the receptionist spot because, one, we didn't want to break the NLS rule, and two, we didn't want to set a precedent that we could do without the dedicated reception position. So really it's a matter of, it's a fine balance of getting the work done and not stepping on toes in the short term and looking at long-term budgetary considerations. Secondly here, the second point is keeping a paper and data trail. Just as with a paid staffer, you want to keep at least some data on the volunteer worker, ranging from what would be on an application such as contact information, experience and references, to any important communications that have to do with scheduling changes or, you know, anything else that you would want to have in your arsenal of information if you should need it later on. And also, the third point here is keeping track of time. When this can either be done with a computer database or even, you know, using good old-fashioned paper tracking. And you just want to do due diligence. Volunteers often want to know how many hours they've donated, and if you are lax in compiling their time, the volunteer may be turned off, feeling that you don't really value their time that much. Setting guidelines. Volunteers want direction and want to know that what they do matters. A couple examples of this: I've been in volunteer positions in Seattle and San Francisco where I have felt valued and that it really motivated my work. And a couple of examples here in Seattle. I was volunteering at a Seattle museum, and when I started, I was immediately given a photo ID badge. And that really made me feel very official and important. And in another museum, I was supposed to be getting a photo ID badge after I put in 100 hours of service. And unfortunately, between the time that I started volunteering and the time that I hit my 100-hour mark, the person who was the volunteer coordinator was laid off, and the person who had taken her spot had several other duties going on and either had no time or inclination and maybe didn't even know that I was supposed to be getting this photo ID badge. And after several questions about it, several emails, several calls, the photo ID badge never came through. So, and since that was something that was earned, when it wasn't delivered, it was a big disappointment, and my time at that particular museum ended soon thereafter. So, you know, we want to know that we are appreciated as volunteers, and we as volunteer managers and supervisors need to let people know that. And an example for engagement in our library, we have 40 off-site Braille transcribers who work at home on a software application, and they are given parts of books, and they're working at their own speed, but hopefully quickly enough that we can get the books completed in a timely fashion. And so these folks working off-site might feel disconnected, and they really do need expectations for what they need to produce, and they need to have concrete guidelines and feedback, and they need to keep in contact with us. And the different department staff here supervises their volunteers for day-to-day work. And there are several different management styles that tie into how the volunteers are involved. And so for me, it becomes a dance of when to get involved and when to step back. And I usually defer to the supervisor when there's a specific work question. But I can be the HR rep, in quotes, and back up the supervisor for any questions or any corrections that are needed in the person's you know, working and their involvement with us and continued involvement with us. So when does a volunteer drain resources? Certainly when there's a diminishing return on investment. For example, around the time I started here, we had a volunteer who was putting in 16 hours a month in return for food stamps. So we were assigning a sheet that he was giving to the food stamp people. And he'd been here for 2 years when I arrived, and in the first few months that we worked together, he was spending less and less time working and more time visiting around the library with other volunteers and preventing them from working. And I tried to reassign him in another job with the people with whom he was spending more time, and this was in machine repair. But you know, it didn't take. He really didn't want to learn the actual job. He just wanted to kind of be around the people doing the work. And since food stamps were his payment for his volunteering here, I really needed to keep him focused. And so I really let him know that the work needed to be done, that he needed to honor the commitment that he was making to us. And also, I mean, he was doing the 16 hours in the last 2 business days of the month. And so if he was sick or we were closed, it became our problem to fix. So you know, being in that position was not the most advantageous to us or to him. So I was really saying we need to spread this out a little bit more and not leave it to the last minute. Another way of draining resources, the second point here, is putting personal interests above the good of the organization. We get several dozen people auditioning annually to be book narrators and radio broadcasters, and when they are applying to us and doing their audition and they're talking to me about how much experience they're going to gain toward their voiceover and acting career, I realize that they're really not doing it with our library and our patrons in mind. So I've learned to do this over the last couple of years and really honest, straight, you know, right up front about what they can expect volunteering for us. I mean, it's very solitary work. There's no reaction from an audience. You are really your own recording engineer, so you don't have a sound person to partner with. So, you know, just kind of, this is not necessarily a voiceover career equivalent. So, you know, this is really to help our patrons. And this is a special circumstance with these voice actors, but I could see a volunteer in another library setting spending more time than is feasible on things that don't really serve the purpose of their being there, or going above and beyond the call of duty and answering reference questions when they shouldn't, for example. And we partner with many work skill assessment organizations, and this is the third point here, and also summer school intern programs. And when their staff is supposed to be on site accompanying their clients and they don't show up, or they try to overload you with people because they couldn't place them elsewhere and they just kind of think, oh, well, Watauga's a good place for that, they can really create a strain on your staff. So be sure in your library, don't get overrun, and make it clear what you can provide as a partner site and what you cannot. Time limits. For people coming to you from public programs, it's probably best to keep turnover consistent. so that people don't become too ensconced, and this gives them some help in the short term, and then they are free to get additional experience at other organizations while you make room for other workers and their skills at your organization. And for the food stamp volunteer that I was mentioning, I let him go ultimately for harassing another volunteer, because that was not in our rules, or that was in our rules. But by then, as I said, he'd been here for 2 years, and so it was really time for him to go. So you know, it's a clean break there. And then also episodic workers, like court-ordered community service people, can be useful, but it took me a while to realize the implications of this, because the more hours they need to perform, the more severe the crime they committed. And so, you know, it took someone several months to do 50 or 100 hours, and I started to realize that these were people with DUI, theft, and assault charges against them. So at this point, we've limited our offerings to court-ordered volunteers to a maximum of 12 hours and only for parking tickets. And if court-ordered people don't really fit into our current mix of people or our work needs, then I just tell them to keep looking at organizations that are on the list that the court gives them. And you know, no good deed goes unpunished, the saying goes. One of our senior volunteers, her 20-something grandson needed some community service work, and so we helped him out. And in the time that he was here, he tagged our bathrooms 4 times. 2 of them in chrome paper towel dispensers, and so we had to pay to get those replaced. So, you know, it is really striking the balance between getting good help and helping others, and not being taken advantage of. So good fits. Volunteers who are good fits for Watauble, and probably most organizations that would use a volunteer, is a volunteer who has a good idea of what they're capable of doing and are willing to take on more. And for example, we've got Mark, and this is not Mark pictured here, this is Katie. Mark is on a job search. He's joined us in the last couple of months, and we started with him by doing shelving and other circulation tasks. And we have recently broadened his work here, being a Braille proofreading partner, and also doing talking book recording reviews, so basically listening to the books that are in the process of being recorded, following along in the print source, and making any edits or changes where the narrator missed a mistake. And Mark has really good work experience from his career in computer technology, and he possesses an attention to detail, so these are really good fits and additional good fits. Another good fit qualification is having confidence and seeking direction as appropriate, but they aren't fearful of breaking the computer system, for example. I'm sure that we've all had people going, oh, if I press the wrong button, everything's going to disappear. And as you know, if you can train them well and they're paying attention, then you know, that's not going to happen, and they can work confidently. And also setting a schedule and being able to stick to it. And they will let you know of scheduling changes, and this is especially important if it impacts other workers like the Braille proofreading teams, where we have a tactile Braille reader reading aloud from the sheets that we've embossed, and the copy holder is the sighted volunteer who is following along in the print source and making sure that it all matches up. So when people don't show up for team stuff, it really impacts the other person and is a big inconvenience, so we want to make sure that everyone is being taken care of. Success stories. We've got a couple of success stories here. On top is pictured Mandy, who is now a library school student at the University of Washington. When she came to volunteer with us, she knew that she was going to be applying to library school, and she volunteered in our book repair department. And then a temp job became available in shipping and circulation, and so she did that for, I think, 3 or 4 months. And then she was accepted to library school at the UW, and she started that, and she just finished her first year. And she has recently started and maybe completed an internship with the Washington State Archives over in Bellevue. And Mandy has let me know that her volunteer work here was useful in her gaining experience and getting confidence. And our other library and tech students from the University of Washington and Highline College, for example, have continued to volunteer with us. They've done directed field work, and they've also brought tour groups in that can spread the word about what we do and what we have to offer. And then pictured on the bottom, we have Tristan, and she's the one on the right. And Tristan did a 50-hour internship through the Washington Department of Services for the Blind on accessible technology. And we had just launched our new Patron computer lab. And so she did an assessment of all of the accessible technology that we had and all the different tools that we had. Different mice and different screen readers and different braille displays, things like that. And she also created a handbook for us. And she also trained some of our patrons and some of our staff, so she was a great asset in those 50 hours. And I have since learned that she's become an adaptive technology instructor at the Society for the Blind in Sacramento. So, a good success story there. It's nice that we were asked to make opportunities available for Mandy and Tristan, and through some nice events that they earned, they are succeeding in their chosen areas. And not as good fits. Volunteers who come in with a preconceived idea of what they want to do, and it's not necessarily something that you can offer. For example, I have people wanting to learn to read Braille who contact us, and they want to take our Braille transcription class, which is, we offer this every year or two with the hope that the people who take the class will become transcribers for us. And you're learning Braille, on the broadest sense, but you're not really learning to read Braille tactily. So people who want to learn to read Braille, they don't get very far. And over 2 times of this class being offered, I've learned to weed these volunteers out ahead of time by discussing their interests and goals. So in a way, you are educating prospective volunteers about your library and helping them find a good placement either with you or elsewhere. Volunteers who need constant reinforcement, the second point here, oftentimes they're there for just the social interaction. And these are people who don't really pay attention during training. They don't take notes. They require you to go over their duties again and again. And these are among the volunteers that drain your resources. And we had a senior program participant in the last few months where the staff was spending at least an hour a day inspecting, correcting, and redirecting his work. And it's okay to be social, but we need to know, and the volunteers need to know, that the work needs to come first. And many people do self-select out when they see that there's not a fit, or they see that we take their time seriously and that they're going to be held accountable for their work. The third point here is they can't or won't set a schedule and stick to it. And setting schedules is most important when it's specialized work like data entry that's going to pile up, or team assignments like the Braille proofreading teams, as opposed to something like ongoing circulation tasks, which are kind of done solo. But even then, circulation has such a volume that we need to count on people to be here. And then the fourth point here, when people just disappear, it really does impact workflow, and maybe the volunteer feels entitled to come and go based on the time that they've been here or whatever relationship they have with the staff here or other volunteers. And we are very understanding about scheduling issues, but if the volunteer does not come in, their job needs to get done by others, and if and when they come back, they won't necessarily have it available to them when they come back. Perceptions, just as people looking at weeded books in your library may say that the library is wasting resources, having a collection development policy in place can help answer any questions or concerns. And so a policy for volunteers keeps everyone's best interests in mind, and the library and its community at the top of the list. And we want to make opportunities available to all, but within our work needs. Having students call me and say that they want to use our facilities to record a book for a school project and then have us distribute it and guide them on copyright issues is really beyond what we can do with our mission and resources. And in cases like that, I refer them to their school's audiovisual department. So if there are no opportunities that fit what they want, finding alternatives for them or with them allows you to at least be of some help. And I am a librarian, so I can, kind of carry that mantle and say, yes, I did some research and helped this person out. And my predecessor was very metrics focused, such as how long did it take for a person to inspect so many books and multiply that by the number of shifts and so on. And that's really fun if you're into that, but people are different, and the circulation and volunteer patterns change here at the library seasonally, or even after a long weekend when there's more mail to go through. And even then, our volunteers work differently at different speeds because we have a wide variety of people who come in here with different skill sets. So we look for quality over quantity, and are they keeping busy and staying interested? And if they are happy, then we are happy. So we look at the outputs, certainly because I do report on the time that we get every quarter to the Secretary of State, but also we want to know that the outcomes are positive ones. So, opportunities for volunteers. Most simply put, look around and see where you need assistance. At Watauble, shipping and circulation is about 50% of all volunteer time spent here. And there's work for all levels of people, from disabled work placement assessments like book inspection, where people are taking a look at the books that have been returned in the mail and making sure that it's all complete and all rewound for the next person to get, or seniors with tech experience, and so we have a lot of ex-Boeing engineers who are in here processing and repairing our talking book machines, and then library students, and this would be weeding collections, our Braille collection, for example. And then also radio and talking book narrators, and also Braille transcribers. These are highly specialized positions with us, and they require training, and in the case of the radio and book people, they require auditions. And in another library setting, this could translate into tutors, storytellers, computer trainers, or other highly trained people in your library. And then also volunteers working in a library specialty, and this could include directed fieldwork students, people who are saying, I'm going to do 50 hours at this library for 1 credit, and a librarian is working with them to guide their work and give feedback. And this could also be data entering book requests into Patron accounts or fixing catalog entries. So there's a lot of different things that higher level volunteers can do, especially those with the library interest. But always remember not to run afoul of HR or union policy! Exclamation point. And then also Watauble, last point here, has a Patron Advisory Council. And this is volunteer leadership. And in a library, there could be a friends group or a board that could work on fundraising or outreach through a speakers bureau. And there are tasks that are obvious, like circulation, but there may be some opportunities in your library that you don't realize can be done by a capable volunteer given the chance. So partnering in your community can be done many different ways, and some of the most effective or the more effective of which include listing with online resources, and I've listed United Way, Volunteer Match, and Idealist.org, and those are ones that we are partnered with. And also partnering with hubs of activity. Seattle Works in Seattle here is a clearinghouse that creates groups of volunteers and matches them with organizations. So if you say, I know I want to volunteer, I don't know with whom or what my interest is, you contact Seattle Works, they get your information, and then they try to set up things that would be interesting to you. And we have at least quarterly, probably monthly work groups come in through Seattle Works, and they do a lot of work in our circulation department and catch us up oftentimes. And then also doing outreach to schools, seniors, service clubs, other nonprofits and corporations, as I mentioned at the beginning, a good way of partnering. Ongoing training programs. Throughout the year, we have students from the Seattle and surrounding school districts come and work with us. And in summer, we clear the decks, and we have students through the Seattle Youth Employment Program, which is through the City of Seattle. And that's SYEP, and there's a lot of diversity among the students who come to us through that program, including some from immigrant families. So in terms of broadening the international makeup of this library, that is one of the groups that helps us do that. And then also through the Washington Department of Services for the Blind, we have the Youth Employment Solutions Program, and this is a program that includes low vision and blind students getting job experience and also life skills. They live in housing near the University of Washington, and they kind of are on their own for maybe the first time in their lives, and so they're learning to be independent, which is great. And a job description really falls under the HR policy slide that came at the beginning. So again, don't reinvent the wheel, and instead, if possible, adapt a job description already in use to make sure that all the bases are covered, and make it as detailed as possible, like a paid job posting would be. And that would be including an overview of the organization, duties, expectations, requirements, preferences, such as library experience or computer experience, and any restrictions. If you need a background check because you're working with youth, or a minimum age, you don't want to have anyone under 16 working for you for liability issues. Make sure that that's all on the job description. And I'm going to go back to expectations really quick, the third point down here. This could be something as simple as keeping a schedule, saying we need to know that you're going to be here to get this work done, because it's the data entry that we can't fall behind in. And also making a time commitment. And for example, the book narrators and radio broadcasters are required to give a 1-year commitment, because we want to make sure that after we've trained them, that we can get at least 1 or 2 books completed with them. And also, if someone is put in the Evergreen Radio Reading Service, that we can count on them being in the broadcast schedule for at least a year, so that we're not juggling and having to replace people and pinch hit and create programs on very short notice. So, yeah, there you go. So that's what should be in a job description. And also placement, finding the right spot and not getting forced into anything. There are times when people try to circumvent our application process, and they just show up to volunteer. And when I was beginning this job 2 or 3 years ago, I was very open to placing people and then dealing with an application later. But over the last 3 years, we've been very good at cultivating good ongoing people, and the volunteer program has been working well with the needs of the departments. So I really discourage drop-ins. Mass orientation versus a one-on-one approach. We find the middle ground for the most part. People starting in the same area should get orientation together, such as the summer work groups working in shipping, or a couple of radio broadcasters being shown the recording technology, or the Braille transcribing class meeting for the very first time, certainly. Otherwise, one-on-one orientation and training can be usually done and works very well. So it really gives that face-to-face, hands-on help to the volunteer, which makes them feel very appreciated. If it works, keep it going, but don't overdo the third bullet down here. Seattle Works, who I've mentioned, has been working with us for years with scheduling work groups, and I was recently contacted by kind of an upstart group doing the same thing. And I said, send me your information. I now have it in my files. We're set for now, but if that changes, I will keep you in mind. So, again, 3 years ago when I started, I wanted everyone to have a chance, everyone to partner with us, and I really realized that that becomes kind of anti-productive in some ways. So don't overdo it. Also, return on investment, as mentioned before. If diminishing return due to checking, correcting, and redirecting someone's work takes too much staff time, then they need reassignment. So yeah, people want to be involved, but be honest with them about how you can best use them. For example, someone just learning to read would not be a good fit for our book recording program, but I would give some alternate opportunities here, or suggest other organizations that may match their interests. Keeping time, we use Volgistics, and the website address is there, volgistics.com, and this is an online system that includes a touch screen in our lobby, so people coming in and leaving can log in, log out, and it tracks the time. Also, there's an online timesheet that people can use, so our off-site transcribers can go in and clock their time that way. And also, it's a very robust system that creates reports for me. I can do emails to people's personal accounts, and also ones that show up on the screen when they log in. Scheduling, applications, contact information, notes. It's all there. A lot of bells and whistles. So it is a very good program. I'm sure there are many others out there. And then also time sheets are okay too, but just don't get buried in paperwork, and try to keep on top of the tabulation. And I've got a question here: how do you enforce policies, job descriptions? I think putting it in writing is certainly the most important thing, so you can always refer back to it saying, this is really the way we needed to move forward with you being a volunteer here, and I'm seeing these problems happening. So go with it from there. And it's really a case-by-case basis. With some of our off-site Braille transcribers, those who have not been producing, we just kind of say, let's give you the opportunity to opt out. And if you don't want to volunteer here anymore, We do have other volunteers that could take up the slack. We'd hate to lose you, but let's find the best fit for both of us. And really, enforcing is, again, a case-by-case basis. And I think from the HR perspective or the big kind of organizational oversight at your library, how do you deal with a problem employee? You talk to them, give them a warning, write it up, keep it on file. And then if it continues happening, you need to let the person go. So that cut and dried. So I hope that answers the question. And of course, call me, email me afterward, and we can talk offline. Evaluation. As time-consuming as it is to do staff evaluations, it would take more time than is available for us to do formal volunteer evaluations. So we keep an ongoing line of communication open with the volunteer, and we make corrections and give feedback as appropriate. And this ties into the enforcing policies and job descriptions. This works very well, just letting people know, we need to see more from you in Braille transcription being delivered. We need to get the radio programs done more quickly. Here's some tips on recording a book more efficiently or effectively. So yeah, and the people who are coming to us as volunteers are very open to feedback, which is a good thing. And when people leave Watauble, this is the second point here, it's usually because of scheduling issues. Sometimes we just don't fit into people's lives anymore. Either they're going back to work or they've changed their commute or something, so they just can't make it. But we do keep the door open, and if someone contacts us later and there's space for them, we try to get them back in. And we're always checking to see that where the departments are at with having enough volunteers for the work and enough work for the volunteers. So this is the third point here. We're also looking to make sure that we're giving substantial work to the volunteer and not just make work. So we like to have people do a lot of different have a lot of different skills in different departments. So if there's a shortage in one space, we're able to move them over and have them work for that particular shift in something else. And also for the off-site Braille transcribers, we have semi-annual meetings at the library to see each other in person, to update on any new rules for Braille code, for example, and also talk about projects that are in process or coming up. And that's another way that we evaluate how we're doing and to recognize our off-site volunteers. Recognition, maybe the most obvious yet important recognition of your volunteers is the respectful handling of their time and presence. And this includes some kind of orientation, some kind of training, a name tag being created for them, and introducing them to staff and other volunteers. Setting a schedule and having work for them. As I mentioned, I like to cross-train people, so the multi-talented people like Mark, who's doing book review, Braille, transcription, proofing, and shipping, are becoming more and more prevalent. So, we're getting a lot of cross-training done. Verbal thanks is probably the most appreciated recognition. This is the giving thanks point here. In one book on volunteering that I have, there's an anecdote about a volunteer who comes into the library in a snowstorm when no other staff can make it, and she does it because of her devotion to the director, who always says thank you to her. And so a little goes a long way in that case. And then events is another way of giving thanks. For example, the National Library Service celebrated its 80th anniversary earlier this year, and we had an event at Watauble, and we also had our first quarterly book club meeting. And we do events throughout the year, and getting volunteers involved with events is both appreciation, and it gets them more involved with the library in ways that they don't normally have that opportunity. And we have maybe 10% of our volunteers who are patrons of the library, so events give more of a chance for volunteers to interact and learn more about each other. Tchotchkes. We have done hats, mugs, and other giveaways which are appreciated by most people. And we did Thanksgiving cards for years, but as supplies ran out and budgets faded away, we modified our approach and ultimately phased it out altogether, and no one really noticed. So, and we've heard that the work that the volunteers do and our support of them is reward enough. So that's a good thing to remember. Also, there is National Volunteer Week, which happens in April of every year. And in the last 3 years that I've done it, it has gone from a week-long catered event with donated food that we had to go out and solicit to a 90-minute program with a guest speaker. And pictured here on the bottom right is Lowen Clausen, who is a local author. And that event was very successful, heard a lot of good feedback, and that's probably going to be the new template for that recognition event. And also, just to remember, a volunteer program can be seen as an evolving thing, responding both to external changes such as budgets and what can be bought, and internally, such as the makeup of your volunteer group changing throughout the year, and your programs and work needs shifting focus throughout the year. So it is a living entity. Remember that. Word of mouth. WTABL gets positive word of mouth from partner program staff and participants, like the directed fieldwork student from the University of Washington pictured here on the right. And that's another reason why you should be sure to create a positive experience for your volunteers. And we work with our interns and directed fieldwork students, for example, to make sure that they get the most out of their experience here, suggesting additional work focus where we think it would be helpful and where they show the interest. And for example, we have a summer intern with us now through the Evergreen State College, who we have teamed up with some of the YES program students that I mentioned earlier to work on book lists for our upcoming year. And this is expanding their experience with computers, doing research, collaborating with each other, and using their judgment in suggesting books for our patrons. And they are patrons of the library themselves, so that's even more valuable to us and to them. So bottom line, make it fun, make it meaningful, and be sure and thank them. And other ways we partner is by doing tours at WTABL and outreach around the state with information fairs and speaking engagements. Pictured here are some visitors from a university in Japan, pictured at left with our director, Danielle Miller. We have a picture on the right of librarians from Central Europe, the Middle East, South Asia, and Africa who visited us through the World Affairs Council. And then in the lower center, we've got a Low Vision Expo from Linwood, Washington, where we did a table and told more people about our services and what we provide. And so our library is seen by potential patrons and volunteers in their own communities, which shows that we have a presence statewide. So the big picture. Getting back to the idea of quantifying the value of volunteer time, this is the national breakdown of value ranges in the United States from the independent sector in Washington, D.C. And we can see by the little green, I wish they had kind of done a gradation on the red, so not so many greens here. But we can see that Washington is in the top third of the United States, in the 2116 to 2183 range, right there. And I think some people from Alaska are with us today, so Alaska's up there as well, probably in the top third, top 25%. So, in the Northwest here, we have some great opportunities to work with talented people and employ their skills. And then WTABL's bottom line. WTABL has 32,000 hours donated annually by 400 people, 225 of which are ongoing throughout the year, and this is mostly the book narrators and the radio broadcasters. And looking at the 2009 value of a volunteer hour, that equates to $690,000 in time, the equivalent of $690,000. And 32,000 hours that is donated to us is more than 15 full-time employees equivalent. So it is a matter of scale. It can reflect well at your library at any level of hours. For example, if you have 10 volunteers who each put in 4 hours a week, that's the equivalent of 1 full-time employee annually. So, it can add up very quickly. These are 2 resources that were here when I came to WTABL, and I scanned through them to see if I had missed anything major for this presentation. The one on the left is more chatty and anecdotal, and that's where the snowstorm volunteer anecdote came from. And on the right, it's very workbooky, and it has flowcharts and other HR-toned metrics. And there are many books on this subject, and there are bound to be some in your public library, so check them out. The Washington State Library is starting to schedule some free trainings around the state on volunteer programs. So visit the URL on the screen for dates and locations, and there's going to be one held in October here at WTABL, so we hope to see you there. And also WebJunction has a module on volunteer management, which is pretty good. I've taken it. And so you can check out that out by visiting the URL on the screen. Partner information. These are the URLs to some of the organizations with which we partner and which I've mentioned, so maybe you can get a better idea of the types of good fits that may be out there for you and your library. Here is my contact information, and so let me know if you have any questions, and check out our website and Facebook page for interesting information. And also, if you're ever in Seattle and you want to visit our library, give me a call and we can arrange a tour. And also, we were recently profiled in the National Library Service January to June 2011 update newsletter, and it's reproduced here, but you can also visit the NLS URL on the screen and learn more about the volunteer program here at Watauval. So thanks for your attention, and enjoy the rest of your month, and thanks everybody.
Thank you, David. Does anyone have any questions? We still have a few more minutes.
Could we go back to the slide that had the youth employment solutions? One more. Whoa.
Nope. Oh,
further forward.
The URLs.
Yeah, thank you.
That. Okay. And these are ongoing programs, so if you see this, you know, in the archived presentation, they're a going concern, so it's throughout the year.
Any other questions? Well, thank you for that great presentation. Very rich in information.
Thank you. Okay,
and
thank you.
Thank you so much for joining us.